2 days before Christmas, my husband was shoving his clothes into a custom designer leather weekender bag. Coldly, he informed me that I was strictly forbidden from stepping foot anywhere near his family's massive estate. He said his ex-wife was flying into Atlanta, and his parents wanted his daughter to spend a complete, respectable, traditional Southern holiday with her real mother. He told me to stay home, order takeout, and refrain from being irrational or hysterical. I didn't argue. I simply handed him his car keys with a calm expression and wished him a safe trip. He drove off, completely convinced he had just put his mediocre bank teller wife back in her place. He had no idea that before the clock struck midnight, every single cent under his name would be legally frozen, and his perfect family, the ones who bragged about their old money heritage, would be cast out onto the streets by Christmas morning. Before I go on, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to handle business yourself to show an arrogant man who actually pays for his crown, make sure to hit like and subscribe. My name is Maya. I'm 33 years old. My day job consists of building capital empires for the ultra-wealthy. But standing in that fully customized kitchen on the morning of December 23rd, you would have thought I was just hired help. The marble island felt icy beneath my hands, but the tension in the room was even colder. My husband, Terrence, stood across from me, roughly pulling the zipper on that expensive leather bag. He didn't even look at me while packing. He was too busy adjusting the $40,000 Patek Philippe on his wrist. It was a stunning timepiece, heavy gold casing, intricate internal mechanics, flawless Swiss craftsmanship. I knew how perfect it was better than anyone because the black card used to pay for it bore my name. Terrence finally looked up, his eyes empty of any warmth. "Maya, don't come to my parents' estate in Buckhead tomorrow," he said offhandedly, as if he were asking me to pick up dry cleaning. I stopped wiping down the pristine counter. My face remained completely neutral. Mistaking my silence for confusion, he let out a heavy sigh. "Chloe's going to be there," he continued, dropping his ex-wife's name without a trace of guilt. "My parents want Zuri to have a real Christmas with her actual mother. You understand, right? Don't make a big deal out of this." I stared at the man I had married. Terrence was handsome, a self-proclaimed successful logistics executive. He always wore tailored suits, exuding the unearned arrogance of a billionaire. He believed his own hype. He genuinely believed the family narrative his parents, DeAndre and Vivian, had fed him since birth. The Sterling family was considered prominent in Atlanta, obsessed with their image and social status. They had always treated me with thinly veiled contempt. In their eyes, I was just a glorified bank teller, a working-class financial drone from a basic background. They thought I had hit the jackpot simply because their handsome, brilliant son decided to settle down with an average woman. They practically worshipped Chloe because she came from an established family, even though her family's trust fund had run dry years ago. They wanted their granddaughter to have her real mother around, and Terrence, eager to please his parents, was more than willing to discard me on the most important day of the year. I didn't scream. I didn't smash the glass I was cleaning. I didn't bring up the subtle, backhanded compliments I had endured from his mother over the years, or his father's dismissive sneers. Instead, I offered absolute compliance. I rinsed the sponge carefully, squeezed out the water, and placed it neatly by the brass faucet. I dried my hands on a linen towel, keeping my expression completely controlled. He was waiting for me to lose control. He wanted drama. He wanted to see me cry so he could label me unstable or hysterical. He wanted me to beg so he could feel in control. I refused to give him that satisfaction. Terrence watched me dry my hands, a condescending smirk spreading across his face. He actually mistook the dead silence for submission. He reached for his cashmere coat, putting it on with a dramatic sigh. "Good. I'm glad you're being mature about this. Just stay here and enjoy the peace. Order some food. Use my card if you want to treat yourself." Just don't ruin Zuri's Christmas. He thought he was being generous. He believed allowing me to buy a holiday dinner on his credit card was an act of royalty. I walked over to the mahogany entryway table, picked up his keys and handed them to him. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't offer a single plea. I looked him straight in the eye and placed the keys in his hand. To anyone watching, it looked like a devoted wife seeing her husband off to a family gathering. In reality, I was starting a flawless countdown to total financial accountability. "Drive carefully, Terrence," I said, my voice smooth and steady. He snatched the keys from my hand and adjusted his lapel. "See you on the 26th, Maya." I stood at the door, watching him walk toward his luxury SUV. The freezing winter wind rushed into the foyer, but I didn't shiver. I watched those wide tires roll over the gravel driveway of our vast property. I watched him climb into a vehicle that cost more than many people's homes. He stepped on the gas, the deep roar of the engine echoing through the quiet, affluent neighborhood. He drove off feeling like he owned the world. He was convinced he was the sole provider, the master of his domain, and that I was merely a convenient addition who required occasional scraps of attention. As the taillights vanished around the bend, my mind instantly went to work cataloging the cold realities his arrogance had blinded him to. He didn't know that the vehicle he was driving was leased through an LLC entirely controlled by my holding company. He didn't know that the multi-acre property he had just exited was purchased in cash using returns from my personal private equity portfolio. And he certainly didn't know that the anonymous seed money that had pulled his successful logistics firm back from the brink of bankruptcy years ago had come directly from me. I was that investor. I had built him up. I funded his lifestyle. I provided the safety net that allowed him to walk around acting powerful, oblivious to the fact that he was walking on a foundation I had laid. He thought he was leaving behind a weak, obedient woman who would spend Christmas Eve weeping over takeout. He couldn't have been more wrong. The moment his red taillights vanished from view, my dutiful wife persona evaporated. The house was dead silent, but the air felt charged with momentum. I closed the heavy oak door and turned the deadbolt. I walked right past the massive, brightly lit Christmas tree in the living room, without giving it a second glance. I headed straight for the bar cart, poured myself a glass of neat bourbon, and took a slow sip. I let the warmth settle in my chest before walking down the hall into my private home office. This room was my real domain. Behind the heavy double doors was the command center of my actual life. I sat at my desk and placed my thumb on the biometric scanner of my encrypted laptop. The screen lit up immediately, casting a cool blue light over the room as financial data, offshore accounts, and restructuring documents flooded the display. This wasn't a bank teller's setup. This belonged to a high-level wealth management specialist who handled tens of millions of dollars before breakfast. I pulled out my secure phone. I scrolled past the family group chats I had muted months ago and dialed the private line for my chief corporate attorney, Julian. It rang twice before he picked up. He knew I only used this line for critical matters. "Maya," Julian said, his voice sharp and professional. "It's time," I replied. My voice was eerily brief. The warmth from the bourbon was gone, replaced by calculated determination. "Execute the complete liquidation protocol. Everything." "Understood," Julian answered immediately. "Are we triggering the asset freezes simultaneously?" "All of it," I confirmed. The vehicles, the real estate holding entities, the corporate credit lines. Cut every financial pipeline to his commercial accounts. Recall all outstanding debt. I want him completely stripped from my capital system before midnight. Handling it right now. I set the phone down and ended the call. The crisp click echoed in the quiet room. That single sound marked the beginning of the end for Terrence and his unearned empire. He wanted a complete Christmas with his real family. I was going to make sure he got exactly that, except he would have nothing left to his name. The satisfying metallic clink of the deadbolt locking behind me was the only farewell the house deserved. I walked back to the kitchen, the place that just 20 minutes ago had been assigned as my domestic holding cell. I pulled a sleek weekender bag from the hall closet and packed my essentials with precise efficiency. A few silk loungewear sets, a tailored blazer, and my backup encrypted drive. Before turning to leave, I slid the 5-carat diamond ring off my left ring finger. I dropped it onto the cold marble of the kitchen island. The platinum band struck the stone with a sharp, clear ring, sounding like a gavel falling in a courtroom. The verdict was in, and it was final. I bypassed the standard family sedan Terrence, thought I drove, and headed straight for the climate-controlled detached garage. I pulled off the dust cover, revealing a matte black Aston Martin, a vehicle Terrence didn't even know I owned. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that matched the cold resolve running through my veins. I pulled out of the suburban property and merged onto the highway, leaving the manicured lawns and the Sterling family's hollow illusions far behind in my rearview mirror. The drive into the downtown core was a quiet transition. I watched the suburban facade fade away, replaced by the towering steel and glass skyscrapers of the city center. This was my actual arena. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of an ultra-exclusive high-rise catering to the high-net-worth elite. I didn't need to speak to concierge or show an access card. My fingerprint activated the private elevator, carrying me effortlessly to the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling $5 million penthouse. I had purchased it 3 years ago, using cash through a Delaware trust. Terrence always assumed my trips into the city were for boring bank compliance seminars or overtime. He would never know I was actually returning to a high-altitude fortress of steel and glass, with an unobstructed view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The space was immaculate and strictly organized, a stark contrast to the chaotic, ego-driven environment I had just left behind. I walked straight to the command center in the glass loft. The setup was serious. 4 Ultra HD monitors mounted on a curved desk, hardwired to secure servers that bypassed standard commercial networks. I sat in the leather executive chair and entered my multi-factor credentials. The screens illuminated simultaneously, bathing the room in a cool blue glow. I opened the master directory. The file name was simple: Sterling Trust. Taking a deep breath, I executed an administrative override and logged directly into the Sterling family's trust portal. In this financial ecosystem, I wasn't just a participant. I was the architect, the gatekeeper, and the sole guarantor. I pulled up the first ledger, opening the file for my father-in-law, DeAndre Sterling. Out in the real world, at the elite country clubs where my mother-in-law Vivian loved to show off her designer dresses, DeAndre was presented as a local captain of industry. But the cold numbers flashing across my screen revealed a total disaster. 3 years ago, DeAndre had quietly drifted to the brink of bankruptcy due to a series of disastrous, over-leveraged commercial real estate investments. Federal creditors were knocking on his door. He was too proud to admit failure to his family, and Vivian would have rather died than lose face in her wealthy social circles. I watched the cursor blink over the deed to their magnificent estate. They had always believed they narrowly avoided liquidation through a miraculous corporate restructuring. They had no idea that I had used a proxy shell company to quietly buy out their defaulted debt. I bought the banknotes. I satisfied the federal creditors. I held the title deed to the sprawling colonial mansion where they were currently preparing to host my husband's ex-wife for a festive Christmas party. Every crystal chandelier they polished, every grand staircase they walked down, belonged entirely to me. They weren't Southern royalty. They were just my tenants. I shifted my focus to the second monitor, pulling up the operational accounts for Terrence Logistics Solutions. Terrence loved standing around at networking events with a drink in his hand, bragging about building a supply chain enterprise from scratch. The spreadsheet in front of me exposed the humiliating truth. The company was bleeding cash. His margins were razor-thin, completely eaten away by his need to lease a fleet of luxury vehicles and maintain an executive suite he couldn't afford. The only reason his business hadn't collapsed a year ago was because my private equity firm had been quietly injecting working capital every month under the guise of an anonymous retainer contract. I was the invisible life support system keeping his fragile ego intact. I opened a third window, navigating to the joint accounts and secondary credit lines. This was where the Sterling family's sheer nerve was fully exposed. I reviewed the transaction history. I saw Vivian spending recklessly at high-end boutiques, with every bill settling through a corporate card I ultimately guaranteed. I saw wire transfers authorized by Terrence, sending a steady stream of funds into accounts belonging to Chloe under the pretense of child support, when in reality it was propping up her failing cosmetics business. The entire family was feasting at a table I was secretly paying for, completely ignoring the fact that the person funding it was the very woman they looked down on and excluded. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. In this room, my control was absolute. For years, I had maintained the illusion just to keep the peace. I tolerated their condescending remarks about my humble background, swallowed their insults about my career, and played the part of the quiet, unremarkable wife. I did it because I believed in the commitment I had made. I thought supporting Terrence behind the scenes would eventually earn me genuine respect. Tonight, that illusion died completely. The man who had just told me I wasn't welcome at the holiday table had handed me the match to burn down his entire kingdom. I initiated the override protocols. I selected the routing numbers linked to the maintenance accounts for DeAndre and Vivian's estate. I queued up termination sequences for every capital pipeline feeding Terrence's logistics company. I wasn't just shutting down a few credit cards. I was systematically severing the financial lifelines that maintained their illusion of wealth. Every keystroke was a targeted strike against the people who thought they could enjoy a perfect Christmas without me. If they wanted to experience life without my presence, I was going to make sure they felt my absence in their bank accounts, their credit scores, and their sudden, catastrophic fall from grace. With the blue light reflecting in my eyes, I prepared the final execution commands, waiting for the perfect moment to let reality hit them like a tidal wave. Suddenly, the sharp vibration of my personal phone broke the quiet hum of the server fans. I looked away from the execution commands, flashing on the fourth monitor, and glanced at the screen. The caller ID instantly made my jaw tighten. Connor. Connor was my sister-in-law, Jaida's husband. He had mastered the art of leveraging his connection to a wealthy family for his own benefit. As a privileged guy who exclusively wore sustainable linen shirts, he loved quoting civil rights leaders at dinner parties and announcing himself as a progressive ally. His favorite pastime was lecturing me about systemic inequality over holiday meals, completely ignoring the fact that his entire parasitic lifestyle was subsidized by a black woman's capital. Connor was a leech in organic cotton. For the past 4 years, he had been draining accounts he assumed belonged to Terrence to fund a series of embarrassing non-profitable business ventures. His current vanity project was an eco-friendly startup promising to revolutionize biodegradable packaging. On paper, it was just a black hole for cash. I let the phone vibrate 3 times. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but my strategic side told me answering would give me real-time intel on the atmosphere at the Sterling estate. I swiped to answer and placed the phone to my ear without saying a word. "Maya, thank goodness you picked up." Connor's voice came through the speaker, carrying his signature forced familiarity, mixed with underlying condescension. In the background, I could hear the unmistakable noise of a lavish holiday party. I heard the clinking of crystal wine glasses, deep bass from holiday music echoing through the grand foyer, and my father-in-law DeAndre's booming laugh. They were already celebrating. They were raising toasts to a perfect family Christmas, without a single care about my exclusion. Orch. What do you need, Connor? My voice was completely flat, stripped of all emotion. He let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh, playing the role of a sympathetic relative. Jada told me you opted out tonight. That's a real shame. The house looks incredible. Vivian really pulled out all the stops with the high-end catering this year. Orch. It's a bummer you couldn't make it, but I guess Terrence thought it was for the best. You know how complicated blended family dynamics can get, so it was probably smart of you to step back. That was their official story. I hadn't been banned so Chloe could play house with my husband. I had simply opted out because I couldn't handle the dynamics. Orch. Connor delivered the insult with casual precision, wrapping a slap in the face with fake sympathy. He was treating me like a fragile, discarded outcast. I didn't take the bait. I didn't defend myself or correct his assumptions. I just waited, listening to the background noise of expensive catering staff, working inside a house I secretly owned. Orch. Anyway, Connor quickly shifted from fake concern to the real reason for his call. I'm in a bit of a jam and I can't reach Terrence. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I figure he's outside taking family photos with Chloe and Zuri by the new ice sculpture. He intentionally dropped the detail about the family photos. It was a power play, a subtle reminder that I didn't belong in their circle. Orch. He expected me to flinch. He expected my voice to shake. Instead, my fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up the financial records for Connor's eco startup. I need you to pass a message to your husband for me. Connor instructed, effortlessly slipping into the tone of an executive giving orders to an assistant. Orch. I have a vendor in Germany, and our new production run needs an immediate cash injection. Terrence and I discussed a holiday bridge loan last week. Just 50 grand to cover things. Tell him to approve my wire before the banks close for the holiday. I need him to push the authorization through his logistics portal right now. I stared at the monitor. The nerve of this man was breathtaking. Orch. He was calling a wife who had just been ousted from her own family home, casually mentioning her husband's ex, and then ordering her to act as a secretary to ensure his vanity project stayed funded. He took it for granted that I was sitting in a suburban kitchen, crying over cold coffee, desperate for any connection to the family. He assumed Terrence was the source of the wealth. Orch. My eyes scanned his startup's digital ledger. The $50,000 he was demanding wasn't for a manufacturing vendor in Germany. The data scrolling on my screen showed his pending transactions. He was trying to settle an invoice for a luxury corporate retreat in Aspen and clear a massive balance on his personal card. Orch. He was using this holiday loan to fund a ski trip for himself and Jada, disguising it as a business expense. This wasn't an isolated incident. I tapped the trackpad, expanding the historical data. Over the last 24 months, Terrence had secretly funneled over $300,000 of what he thought were company profits to Connor's shaky business. Orch. And every single dollar had originated from the equity line I set up to keep Terrence from going under. I had been quietly funding Connor's ski trips, his expensive linen shirts, and his condescending dinner lectures from the shadows. Connor let out an impatient sigh, annoyed by my silence. Ma? Are you listening? Look, I know you're probably having a rough night, but this is real business. Orch. Real money is on the line. All you have to do is text Terrence and tell him to hit approve on the wire portal. It takes 2 seconds. Don't make me drive over there and disrupt his family time just to get a signature. He was threatening me. He was implying that if I didn't play the obedient messenger, he would ruin Terrence and Chloe's perfect moment, and somehow that would be my fault. Orch. Deeply rooted disrespect radiated from every word. To Connor, I wasn't a peer or a professional. I was just an obstacle standing between him and the money he felt entitled to. I leaned back in my leather chair. The blue light illuminated a cold smile spreading across my face. I watched the green approve button flashing on the screen. Orch. That was the primary gateway for outgoing capital from Terrence's company. The exact button Terrence used to play the generous brother-in-law. The bank closes in 40 minutes, Maya, Connor snapped, his progressive persona completely melting away to reveal what he really was, a greedy, entitled parasite. I need you to do your job and get him to authorize this transfer. I didn't raise my voice. Orch. I didn't show a hint of anger. I let the absolute silence of the penthouse settle around me before giving him my answer. My eyes remained fixed on the financial lifeline I was about to cut with a single keystroke. I placed the phone on the desk and hit the speaker button. Connor was still breathing heavily on the line, letting out exaggerated sighs. Orch. He fully expected me to scramble, imagining me cowering at his authoritative tone and desperately texting my husband for approval. That was the dynamic he had grown comfortable with over the last 4 years. He played the visionary founder. Terrence played the generous benefactor, and I was relegated to the background. They had built their entire brotherhood on a foundation paid for with my money. Orch. My hand hovered over the mechanical keyboard. The tactile feel of the keys was grounded and real. I didn't send a frantic text to the man showing off his ex-wife at my property. Instead, my fingers executed a series of administrative commands built into my management interface. "Did you message him or what?" Connor demanded, his voice sounding thin and harsh through the speaker. Orch. Maya, I don't have time for games. If this wire gets rejected, my whole supply chain freezes. If we have to cancel our holiday plans because you couldn't handle a simple administrative task, Jada is going to be furious. I ignored his voice, focusing entirely on the monitor displaying financial line. I navigated directly to the corporate credit portfolio. Orch. There it was, the platinum business card ending in 4109. The account was registered under his eco-packaging startup, but the transaction history read like a trust fund diary. Just last week, he had used it at a high-end jewelry store in Buckhead to buy Jada a diamond tennis bracelet. At Sunday dinner, he had flexed it as proof of his hard work and recent business success. Orch. Vivian had clapped with delight, praising him for taking such good care of her daughter. Terrence had patted him on the back, completely unaware, or unconcerned, that the bracelet was actually funded by my private equity returns. I moved the cursor to the icon next to the card marked Active. Without hesitation, I clicked the drop-down menu and selected Immediate Suspension Protocol. Orch. A bright red prompt appeared on the screen, asking for final confirmation to freeze all associated lines of credit. I hit Enter. The status indicator shifted from green to a stark red, account suspended per authorized holder instructions. Next, I opened the master routing directory for Terrence Logistics Solutions. I needed to remove the problem entirely, not just treat the symptom. Orch. I bypassed the surface-level accounting and went straight to the scheduled disbursements. Terrence was sloppy. He had set up a recurring automated transfer disguised as a monthly consulting advance. On the 1st and 15th of every month, $12,000 quietly slid from my holding firm, through Terrence's company, and directly into Connor's operating account. Orch. It was a perfectly staged pipeline of unearned wealth. I highlighted the entire recurring transfer configuration. I didn't just pause it. I executed a permanent deletion. I wiped his routing numbers, his business tax ID, and his vendor profile from the system. I watched the data dissolve, erasing 4 years of parasitic history in under 30 seconds. Orch. Maya, Connor barked, his voice rising, completely unaware that his digital pockets were currently being cleared out. The bank representative is waiting on the line for the authorization code right now. I need you to do your job. Stop being petty about Christmas and get Terrence to approve this. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold desk. The blue light washed over my face. Orch. I finally broke my silence, my voice dangerously calm, completely free of the anger he anticipated. Terrence can't approve anything anymore, Connor. Dead silence fell over the line for a fraction of a second. The sudden, icy composure in my tone caught him off guard. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his bravado slipping. "Just send him the portal link. He knows the login." Arch. My eyes stayed locked on the red status flashing on the screen. Terrence doesn't have a login anymore. He doesn't have a portal, and he certainly doesn't have $50,000 to fund your luxury ski trip to Aspen. A sharp intake of breath came through the speaker. I knew the exact moment panic pierced his armor. Arch. He had always assumed his financial maneuvering was buried deep within complex corporate accounting. He had severely underestimated the woman who built those accounts in the first place. "I don't know what you're talking about," Connor stammered, his voice suddenly losing its authority. "That's for a vendor in Germany. It's a critical supply chain issue." Arch. I pulled up the exact invoice he had submitted earlier that afternoon. I read the details back to him with precise accuracy. "That's funny. Your German vendor charges $48,000 for a private cabin rental and a charter flight out of Atlanta. I guess sustainability is an expensive business to fake." Orch. "Maya, listen to me," he began, his tone shifting instantly from demanding to desperate. "You're misreading the ledger. Terrence and I have an arrangement. We have a system. You can't just mess with our business operations because you're having marriage trouble today. You don't understand how these accounts work." I let out a soft, humorless laugh that echoed through the quiet penthouse. Orch. Telling a wealth management specialist that she didn't understand the accounts she personally funded required pure, unfiltered arrogance. "I understand perfectly, Connor, because I built the system. The logistics company Terrence uses to play venture capitalist is entirely funded by me, and the credit line you just used to buy Jada a diamond bracelet, I'm the sole guarantor. Or rather, I was." Orch. I watched the final synchronization bar complete its cycle on the right monitor. The financial firewall was locked down. The cut was absolute. "What do you mean was?" Connor asked, total panic taking over his voice. "Maya, wait, let's talk about this logically. Don't do anything drastic. If that wire doesn't go through, my business account defaults tomorrow morning, and I have payroll." Orch. "I have creditors." "Terrence can't approve anything anymore, Connor." I moved closer to the microphone, delivering the final truth with complete clarity. "Your funding is gone. Merry Christmas." I reached out and pressed the red button on the screen, ending the call. The silence that followed was absolute, the sound of a parasitic connection finally being cut. Orch. Less than 5 seconds later, my phone lit up again. The screen was flashing wildly. I let it ring. I watched the display go dark, only to instantly light up with a second call, then a third. Next, a tidal wave of text messages flooded in, the tone rapidly shifting from demands and threats to pathetic, frantic apologies. Orch. He was begging for a conversation, begging for a grace period, begging the exact woman he had just viciously insulted to save him from financial ruin. I didn't read a single message. I picked up the phone, navigated to his contact profile, and tapped the block button. I set the phone back on the desk. The screen went completely black, shutting his panic out for good. Orch. I turned my attention to the next monitor, ready to execute the next phase of the liquidation plan. I had just dismantled that arrogant brother-in-law. The rest of the family was about to follow right behind him. Leaving Connor behind, I turned my chair toward the central console of my workstation. Orch. Outside my massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the downtown skyline was bathed in the quiet hum of Christmas Eve. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the skyscrapers in a seamless blanket of white. Up here above the clouds, everything was pure tranquility. Inside my penthouse, however, my monitors were a vibrant, pulsing battlefield. Orch. I opened a dedicated, encrypted browser window and pulled up the Sterling family's social media profiles. Months ago, to protect my peace of mind, I had blocked their accounts, refusing to subject myself to their endless digital flexing. But tonight, their feeds were going to be my primary source of intel. Orch. The Sterlings were chronic oversharers, completely addicted to projecting an image of untouchable class, old money heritage, and perfect family harmony. They lived for the likes and validation of the city's elite. Tonight, that desperate craving for digital applause was going to provide the exact coordinates for their downfall. At 8 o'clock sharp, the first heavy hitter was posted. It was from Vivian. I clicked on the high-resolution image, letting it expand across my secondary monitor. In the frame was the 12-foot imported fir tree I had paid a top decorator to install in the foyer 2 weeks ago. Standing in front of it was Terrence, wearing a tailored velvet blazer and flashing his signature, charismatic smile. To his right was Zuri, looking adorable in custom holiday attire. And standing directly to his left, her hand resting intimately on his shoulder, was Chloe. Chloe was wearing a floor-length silk gown with perfectly styled hair, looking every bit the high society figure she was desperately trying to maintain. They looked like a cover photo for a lifestyle magazine. They looked seamlessly united. I read the caption Vivian had typed below the photo. Nothing is sweeter than true family coming together for the holidays. Blood is thicker than water, and real class never fades. So blessed to finally have this house filled with the people who actually belong here. If this had been a year ago, reading those words would have sent me into a devastating spiral of self-doubt. I would have sat in the dark, wondering what I was missing. I would have asked myself why my Ivy League degree, my tireless work ethic, my massive financial backing, and my unwavering loyalty were never enough to earn even an ounce of genuine respect at their table. I would have cried quietly in the master bathroom, hiding my vulnerability from Terrence so he could maintain his illusion of total control. Not tonight. Tonight, looking at that photo, I felt nothing except the cold, mechanical precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. They didn't just want to exclude me from the holiday dinner. They wanted to erase my existence entirely. They wanted to replace me with a woman whose greatest achievement was simply being born into a family that used to have money back in the 1980s. A woman playing the role of the submissive, decorative ex-wife to perfection. I zoomed in on the photo. I looked at the glittering diamond earrings on Vivian's ears. I looked at the imported Italian marble flooring beneath their feet. Vivian wanted to talk to her thousands of followers about who truly belonged in this house. I decided it was time to clarify the property title on a legal level. I didn't respond with tears. I responded with my keyboard. I minimized the social media feed and pulled up the master deed directory on my main display. Vivian loved throwing parties. She loved inviting prominent politicians and business leaders into her home, serving expensive catering, pouring outrageously priced wine, and soaking in the illusion that she was the matriarch of an untouchable financial dynasty. She actively mocked women who had to work for a living, constantly throwing passive-aggressive jabs at my career. She treated me like a charity project Terrence had picked up from the wrong neighborhood, deliberately ignoring the fact that her own husband had driven their finances straight into a brick wall. 3 years ago, when DeAndre was facing federal tax liens and complete financial ruin, he was terrified of Vivian finding out. He went to Terrence, and Terrence came to me, begging for a solution that wouldn't destroy his family's reputation. I used my private equity firm to bail them out, taking over their debt through a proxy company. I highlighted the deed to the Sterling estate on my screen. The property was held under a trust fully controlled by me. I opened the legal communications portal, connecting directly to the retainer law firm that handled my real estate enforcement. I didn't draft a long, emotional email complaining about my mother-in-law. I kept it strictly business. I attached the digital deed, the default records from 3 years ago, and the current ownership structure documents. I typed an irreversible instruction to my real estate legal team. Initiate immediate eviction proceedings against the Buckhead estate. Draft a 30-day notice to vacate. Prepare the paperwork and have it hand-delivered first thing tomorrow morning. I clicked send. An automated confirmation flashed on the screen, verifying that the legal team had received the directive and was processing it. I took a slow sip of bourbon, enjoying the smooth burn in the back of my throat. Vivian's so-called real family was going to be packing their personal belongings into cardboard boxes during the upcoming holiday season. They were about to learn a very quick lesson. Real class might never fade, but if you can't pay your mortgage, your homeownership definitely will. I wasn't anywhere near done. The matriarch's post was just the appetizer. When I refreshed the browser, a new notification popped up. Terrence had just uploaded a video to his main page, and Chloe was tagging him in her stories. They were actively handing me the exact targets I needed, delivering the coordinates for their own destruction in one smug post after another. I cracked my knuckles, shifted my focus to the next monitor, and prepared to dismantle the next pillar of their fake reality. My fingers tapped the refresh key on the social media dashboard. The algorithm, completely unaware of the financial execution taking place inside my penthouse, eagerly served up the latest upload on Terrence's profile. It was a high-definition video posted just 2 minutes prior. I leaned closer to the monitor, the cool leather seat letting out a soft creak in the quiet room. Terrence was standing on the estate's sweeping circular driveway. The exterior accent lighting caught his fresh haircut and the rich texture of his velvet blazer. He was holding a crystal tumbler of dark liquor in one hand, while panning his phone camera across the property with the other. He was grinning with the arrogant confidence of a man who thought he ruled the entire city. The camera panned past the manicured hedges and locked onto the main attraction, parked right in the center of the driveway. Gleaming under the security lights was a custom matte black Mercedes G-Wagon. Hard work pays off, Terrence announced to his thousands of followers, his voice dripping with unearned pride. When you grind all year, you can provide the best for your people, giving the girls in my life the luxury they deserve. Merry Christmas to all the real go-getters out there. The camera flipped briefly, catching Chloe stepping into the frame. She leaned against the heavy passenger door of the massive SUV, flashing a flawless smile for the camera as she adjusted a designer scarf around her neck. Zuri was in the background, playing near the massive front pillars of the house. It was the ultimate flex of patriarchal success. He was the provider. He was the king showing off his spoils. I set my bourbon glass down on the desk, the ice clinking sharply against the crystal. That vehicle was not proof of his hard work. It was a monument to my tolerance. 11 months ago, Terrence came to me complaining that his logistics company needed a flagship executive vehicle to project the right image to potential clients. He tried financing it through his business, but his corporate credit score was a complete disaster. The dealership practically laughed him off the lot. He came home humiliated, begging me to leverage my banking connections to secure a lease. I didn't just help him secure a lease. I used a subsidiary under my private equity umbrella to buy the vehicle outright with cash. Then, I drafted a heavily discounted corporate lease agreement between my holding company and his business. I put him behind the wheel of a $200,000 machine for the price of a mid-size sedan, purely to protect his fragile ego and keep the peace in my home. He drove that vehicle to exclusive golf clubs, tossed the keys to valets at 5-star restaurants, and let his parents brag to everyone about their son's incredible upgrade. He was using my asset to play the generous big shot for a woman who was replacing me for the holidays. I opened a new terminal on Monitor 2, bypassing standard banking portals to log directly into my holding company's fleet management database. The interface was stark and practical, showing black text against a harsh white background. I typed in the vehicle identification number from memory. The master profile popped up instantly. Status: active. Lessee: Terrence Logistics Solutions. Location: currently tracked via satellite GPS on the driveway of the Buckhead estate. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard for less than a second. I navigated to the Contract Enforcement tab. The lease terms I had written were airtight, standard protections I applied to all corporate assets. Which, a single missed payment or a breach of the conduct clause gave the holding company the right to immediate, unannounced repossession. Terrence hadn't made the nominal lease payment in 2 consecutive months. He assumed I would cover the difference from our joint account as usual, believing a wife's grace period extended infinitely into the cold reality of corporate finance. I clicked the primary enforcement button. Status: revoked. Contract terminated. The digital tie was severed in an instant, but clicking a button on a screen wasn't enough. I wanted the physical proof of his failure wiped off that driveway while his family was still pouring their second round of holiday cocktails. I picked up my secure phone and dialed a professional asset recovery firm I kept on retainer for commercial default cases. This wasn't some basic suburban tow truck crew. They were a tactical repossession agency operating out of downtown Atlanta, staffed by professionals who specialized in retrieving high-value assets from hostile, high-net-worth neighborhoods. The dispatcher answered on the first ring. Priority extraction needed, I said, my voice completely stripped of emotion. The dispatcher let out a rough sigh. Ma'am, it's Christmas Eve. My drivers are on a skeleton crew tonight. Unless a commercial rig is blocking a highway, this is going to have to wait until the 26th. I tapped a manicured nail against the mahogany desk. I'll pay a $10,000 premium for an immediate dispatch. The funds will be wired to your commercial account the second your truck rolls out of the yard. I need a vehicle towed off a residential driveway in Buckhead within the hour. A heavy silence lingered on the line for 3 seconds. I knew the exact moment the money outweighed his holiday schedule. Give me the address and the vehicle details, the dispatcher said, the exhaustion vanishing from his voice. I recited the estate address, along with the make, model, and license plate. It's in a gated community with security, the dispatcher noted, typing rapidly in the background. My guy can't break through a security gate without a police escort, and we won't get civil assistance on a holiday night. You won't need to break through anything, I answered smoothly. I own the property. I read off the master gate code for the community. Then, I provided the secondary override code for the estate's private iron gates. I opened the live GPS tracking window on my monitor. The vehicle is parked facing out, completely unobstructed in the center of the main driveway loop. The keys are likely inside the house, but my holding company retains remote administrative access. The moment your driver attaches the tow cables, I will electronically unlock the transmission and release the emergency brake from my terminal. He won't even need to approach the front door. He can hook it, lift it, and haul it out before they even finish their drinks. Done, the dispatcher confirmed. I'm sending my best driver. He's only 5 miles away. I hung up and set the phone face down on the desk. On screen, the blue flashing dot from the GPS tracker remained still on the driveway. In less than 20 minutes, that dot would start moving down the highway, dragging Terrence's pride and status all the way to a dark impound yard. Tomorrow morning, when he walked outside to load his ex-wife's luggage into his prized vehicle, he would find only an empty driveway and an undeniable reality. He was completely empty-handed. 2 targets locked and neutralized. The brother-in-law was financially choked out. The luxury SUV was minutes away from being forcibly towed. I stretched my neck, feeling a satisfying click as the tension released. I turned my attention to the third monitor. It was time to deal with Chloe. My third screen lit up with a new notification. Chloe had just started a live stream on her social media. The timing was almost too perfect, as if she were reading lines from a script I had written for my own amusement. I maximized the window, letting her face fill the high-res display. She was standing in the estate's grand foyer, positioned strategically, so the sweeping mahogany staircase, an imported crystal chandelier framed her perfectly in the background. Porch. She wore a stunning crimson silk gown that trailed elegantly on the floor, holding a glass of expensive vintage champagne. It was the exact vintage I had custom ordered from a private vineyard in France last month, now being casually enjoyed by the woman strutting around my property. Chloe beamed at the camera, tossing her styled hair back. Porch. She began speaking rapidly to her thousands of followers, her voice dripping with the fake enthusiasm tailored for an online audience. She was bragging about Glow by Chloe, her high-end cosmetics boutique located in one of downtown Atlanta's most expensive retail districts. Raising her champagne glass, she announced that her store had just wrapped up a record-breaking holiday sales week. Porch. She claimed her signature inventory was completely sold out, thanking her loyal customers for supporting a self-made, independent female business owner. Then, she turned the camera slightly to the right. Terrence stepped into the frame, his arm sliding naturally around her waist. Chloe leaned her head against his shoulder, looking back at the lens. Porch. And a special shout-out to my amazing co-parent and sponsor, she pouted, raising her glass to him. Real men know how to invest in the mother of their child. Thank you for always making sure my vision comes to life. Terrence gave a humble but completely fake nod to the camera, playing the part of the benevolent millionaire sponsor to perfection. Sponsor. Porch. That single word echoed in the quiet of my penthouse. A sponsor implied a benefactor operating out of a vast surplus of personal wealth. Terrence was no sponsor. Terrence was a thief. I leaned back in my leather chair, examining the digital performance with clinical detachment. Glow by Chloe was a total financial disaster. I knew this not through rumors, but through cold, undeniable math. Porch. From the day the store held its ribbon cutting 2 years ago, the boutique had been bleeding cash. Chloe possessed zero actual business sense. She blew her initial capital on lavish launch parties, imported flower walls for photo ops, and overpriced influencer marketing campaigns, while completely ignoring basic fundamentals like inventory management, overhead costs, and payroll taxes. Porch. She loved the title of CEO, but despised the actual labor required to run a business. 6 months ago, during a routine late-night audit of our joint commercial holding accounts, I discovered a massive leak. I noticed a pattern of unauthorized capital flight. Porch. Terrence had been quietly drafting fraudulent corporate invoices, categorizing these outgoing funds as supply chain consulting fees and warehouse maintenance costs for his logistics firm. But when I traced the routing numbers, they didn't match any verified corporate vendor. Every single fake invoice was wiring money directly into the primary operating checking account for Glow by Chloe. Porch. Over the past 18 months, Terrence had siphoned over $250,000 of my money to artificially inflate her sales figures and keep her commercial landlord from filing eviction suits. He did all of this just so she would look at him with the glowing admiration she was displaying right now on her stream. Porch. He felt so inferior, standing next to a wife who had built a real financial empire, that he stole the fruits of my labor to buy the respect of an ex-wife who couldn't even read a balance sheet. He was committing corporate embezzlement and tax fraud just to fuel his fragile male ego. Over the last 6 months, I hadn't confronted him or cried over his financial infidelity. Porch. I spent that time compiling a masterpiece. I closed the social media application and opened a new, heavily encrypted browser window. Bypassing standard search engines, I navigated directly to the digital reporting portal for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I pulled up the master encrypted file from my secure server drive. Porch. It was a 120-page forensic accounting audit, assembled with the cold precision of a senior wealth management specialist. It contained copies of every single fraudulent invoice Terrence had fabricated. It contained exact timestamps, transaction IDs, and routing codes for every wire transfer sent from our joint corporate accounts into Chloe's business checking account. Porch. The documentation detailed the exact amounts of unreported corporate income she had received, her deliberate evasion of gift taxes, the illegal commingling of personal and business funds, and the systematic corporate embezzlement orchestrated by my husband. I attached the massive digital file to the federal reporting portal. I filled out the whistleblower declaration form with meticulous accuracy. I didn't submit the filing anonymously. I used my full legal name, attaching my credentials and license numbers as a registered financial fiduciary. The IRS receives thousands of petty, anonymous complaints every day, which they usually ignore. But they never ignore a fully documented forensic accounting report submitted by a licensed wealth management specialist with an unbroken chain of custody. They were going to act. They were going to act fast and without mercy. I reviewed the submission details one last time. Chloe wanted the world to know she was an independent business owner, supported by a generous sponsor. I was simply making sure her financial records aligned with her public claims. I pressed the submit button. A bright green confirmation code appeared on the screen, verifying that the federal government had received the payload. The gears of a federal tax investigation are notoriously slow, but automated fraud flags placed on commercial bank accounts are instantaneous. The moment the banking networks restarted their mainframes after the holiday weekend, the automated system would register the federal inquiry. They would place an immediate, hard hold on Glow by Chloe's merchant and operating accounts, pending a full audit. She wouldn't be able to process a single credit card transaction. She wouldn't be able to pay her commercial rent. She wouldn't be able to make her January payroll. The moment her automatic drafts failed, her suppliers would cut her off. Her boutique, her source of pride, her entire identity as a successful self-made entrepreneur would evaporate overnight. The glass doors of her decorated shop would be locked tight, with a federal notice posted on the inside window. She wanted a sponsor to fund her lavish lifestyle. I had just sponsored a full federal tax audit for her. I closed the browser, watching the green confirmation code fade into the dark screen. The silence in the penthouse felt heavier now, filled with the undeniable weight of irreversible actions. The main source of my husband's pride, his luxury vehicle, was currently being hooked up to the back of a tow truck. His ex-wife's business was now fundamentally destroyed by a federal trigger. I pushed my chair back from the workstation, the leather letting out a soft creak in the quiet $5 million sanctuary. I walked over to the custom bar by the window, picked up the heavy crystal decanter, and poured another glass of bourbon. The amber liquid swirled smoothly in the glass. I took a slow sip, feeling the familiar warmth slide down my throat, grounding me in what I had just accomplished. I walked back to the desk, remaining standing as I leaned over the console to open a secondary tracking dashboard. I had coded a specific alert protocol into the freeze directives. Any attempted transaction on the locked accounts would bounce a decline notification straight back to my server. I wanted to witness the exact moment the panic started to set in. I didn't have to wait long. At 12:12 a.m., the first alert chimed on the screen. It was an attempted $8,000 transaction on Terrence's personal black card at an exclusive online luxury retailer. He was trying to authorize an expedited delivery for a jewelry purchase. He wanted to give Chloe a spectacular Christmas morning surprise, likely a diamond necklace to match the earrings she wore in that smug social media video. He wanted to play the generous, wealthy co-parent, showering his real family with expensive gifts. The system declined the transaction instantly. Insufficient funds. Account frozen. I smiled, taking another sip of bourbon. I remembered the cubic zirconia engagement ring he had given me years ago, claiming it was a priceless family heirloom because he didn't want commercial diamonds to taint our love. He had saved the real diamonds for the woman who demanded them, buying them with money I had earned. Not anymore. Chloe was going to wake up to an empty stocking tomorrow morning. Orch. 2 minutes later, a barrage of alerts lit up the screen, all coming from the family trust accounts. Vivian was trying to process a massive payment to the elite catering company she had hired for the holiday feast. The caterer was likely demanding the final balance before leaving the premises. Primary card declined. Vivian tried a secondary card tied to the trust. Declined. She tried a third. Orch. Declined. I could picture the scene in the foyer of the estate I legally owned perfectly. Vivian, in her emerald silk dress and heirloom pearls, laughing nervously as she handed card after card to the catering manager. Her polished mask was cracking as every terminal beeped with a rejection. The embarrassment would be suffocating. Orch. The caterer would firmly demand payment, while DeAndre tried to step in with his own cards, only to find them equally useless. The illusion of their high-class dynasty was shattering in real time right in front of the hired staff. Another alert flashed. Orch. Connor was desperately trying to log into his commercial supply chain portal, attempting to force a manual override on the wire transfer I had canceled hours ago. The system completely rejected his credentials. Account does not exist. He was officially locked out of the bank vault he had been raiding for 4 years. The tension inside my penthouse reached an intoxicating peak. Orch. The quiet environment of my command center stood in beautiful contrast to the absolute chaos erupting miles away in Buckhead. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. I didn't feel a shred of the sadness they expected from the discarded, mediocre wife. I felt only pure, unadulterated clarity. The clarity of a woman who had finally stopped lighting herself on fire to keep a group of parasites warm. Orch. For the past 3 years, Terrence had made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. He flaunted Chloe everywhere, allowed his parents to disrespect me to my face, and mistook my silence for compliance, my patience for weakness. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the woman he married. True apex predators never roar before they strike. Orch. They study the ecosystem, identify the weaknesses, wait for the most devastating moment, and then snap the trap shut. Midnight was my moment. The financial network was cold, automated, and entirely devoid of holiday spirit. A frozen account didn't care that it was Christmas Eve. The banking infrastructure obeyed only code, and I held the master key. Orch. I sat back down in the executive chair, setting the bourbon on a leather coaster. The digital execution was complete. The arteries were severed, the empire was in ashes. Now, it was only a matter of time before they realized the reality of their destruction. I rested my hands on the desk, my eyes locked on the black screen of the secure phone. The trap had been sprung. Orch. I sat in the quiet of my hidden fortress waiting for the phone to ring. At 12:15 a.m. sharp, the dead silence of my penthouse was finally broken. The secure phone on the mahogany desk lit up, vibrating violently and buzzing against the wood. I looked down at the glowing screen. Terrence calling. I didn't scramble for the device. Orch. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers, watching the screen flash in the dark. I let it ring once. That first ring was for the way he zipped up his leather bag in my spotless kitchen hours ago, casually adjusting the $40,000 watch I had quietly paid for, completely ignoring my presence in my own home. For years, I would have jumped at the first ring. Orch. I had trained myself to be a responsive, problem-solving wife, terrified of bruising his fragile ego. If Terrence called, Maya answered. If Terrence needed capital to save a failing deal, Maya transferred the funds before he even had to ask twice. That version of me was officially dead and buried. The phone kept vibrating on the desk. I let it ring a second time. Orch. That second ring was for the pure, unvarnished arrogance of telling a black woman who had built a private equity empire from scratch that she wasn't welcome at the holiday table because she lacked noble blood. Orch. It was for his mother Vivian and his father DeAndre, who were undoubtedly hyperventilating in their grand foyer, realizing their generational wealth was nothing more than a ghost story I had funded. I could picture the exact panic, creeping across Terrence's face. He was a man who always needed to feel like the smartest, most powerful person in the room. Now the walls of his reality were collapsing, and he was frantically trying to reach the woman he had just thrown away like trash. The third ring echoed through the quiet room. I took a slow, deep breath, centering myself completely. I wasn't acting out of petty revenge or instability. This was a hostile corporate takeover of my personal life. I picked up the phone. I didn't swipe to answer right away. I waited until the absolute last second before it went to voicemail. I pressed the green button and brought the cold device to my ear. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask what was wrong. I just sat in the silence of my penthouse, listening to the destruction I had created. The audio bursting through the speaker was absolute, unfiltered chaos. The polished, aristocratic atmosphere of the Sterling family Christmas had completely evaporated. I could hear Vivian in the background, her voice screeching in an undignified scream as she argued furiously with someone who sounded like the lead caterer. I heard heavy, frantic footsteps on the hardwood floors. I heard Connor, the progressive ally, cursing loudly about a German wire transfer and threatening to sue a bank manager for gross negligence. Maya, Terrence's voice erupted through the phone. It was loud, demanding, and laced with a tight, suffocating panic he was desperately trying to hide behind his usual tone of authority. Maya, are you there? Pick up the phone and talk to me right now. I took a slow sip of bourbon, the ice clinking softly against the glass, a sound that carried clearly through the line. I let him stew in the silence for another 5 seconds, taking absolute control of the pace of the call. I'm here, Terrence, I answered. My voice was smooth, completely level, and free of the hysteria he was expecting. I told you I was going to have a quiet night. Don't play games with me right now, Maya, he snapped, his breathing rapid. There's a catastrophic problem with the accounts. All of them. I'm standing in the foyer with the catering manager, and every card tied to the family trust was just rejected. My corporate card is locked solid. I just tried logging into the logistics portal to check our reserves, and the system rejected my admin credentials. I glanced up at the secondary monitor, watching the real-time security log confirm his words. Multiple failed login attempts from his mobile device. I had revoked his access 45 minutes ago. You need to call Julian and the bank liaison immediately to figure out what kind of system glitch this is, Terrence ordered, the panic seeping through his aggressive exterior. Connor is losing his mind in the living room, saying a wire was just kicked back, and Chloe is complaining that her boutique's payment gateway sent her an automated federal hold notice. Open your laptop and fix this right now. I listened to him break down. He was still issuing orders. Even standing in the burning ruins of his financial life, his first instinct was to command his bank teller wife to fix a system administration error. He genuinely believed this was a massive, coincidental server failure. His towering arrogance acted as a shield against the terrifying truth that a woman could have so completely outsmarted him. He thought a banking glitch was ruining his perfect Christmas with his ex-wife, not a surgical strike launched by his current wife. Fix it, Maya, he demanded again, his voice cracking slightly. Wake Julian up if you have to. This is completely unacceptable. We have important guests arriving tomorrow morning. The caterers are threatening to pack up the food and leave. I will not have my parents humiliated in their social circle like this. Call fraud prevention immediately and authorize an emergency override. He wanted me to save his parents from humiliation. He wanted me to protect the people who actively excluded me while disrespecting the capital used to fund them. He wanted me to ensure Chloe enjoyed a wonderful holiday meal in a house I owned. I moved closer to the phone's microphone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I delivered everything with a terrifying calm, preparing to speak the words that would shatter his entire world. Maya, answer me right now. Terrence's voice cracked completely. It was a high-pitched, pathetic sound that destroyed the polished executive baritone he practiced in the mirror every morning. The smug, arrogant tone he had used in the kitchen was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered terror. Porch. He was gasping for air, his ragged breathing echoing through the speaker, as if he had just sprinted up a flight of stairs. "Maya, what did you even do?" Terrence shouted, his voice laced with panic, anger, and absolute desperation. "My card was declined. The main business accounts are frozen. Connor is in the living room screaming that his startup just went under." "Why are you doing this to me?" Porch. I didn't utter a single sound. I sat completely still in the blue glow of my monitors, letting the heavy silence of the penthouse act as a mirror, reflecting his hysteria right back at him. I took a slow sip of my bourbon. The ice clinked softly against the crystal glass, a sharp note carrying clearly over the cell line. "Are you drinking?" Terrence demanded, his voice pitching higher. "Porch. I am standing in the middle of a total disaster and you are having a drink? You need to log into the private equity portal right now. There's a massive routing error. The bank is showing a zero balance across all accounts. Every single line of credit is locked down." I listened to the chaos unfolding in his background. It was a complete breakdown. Porch. I could hear Vivian hyperventilating, surrounded by an army of unpaid contractors demanding their final checks. Her sharp sobs were interrupted by the sound of shattering glass. Someone had dropped a tray or smashed a champagne flute. DeAndre was yelling into another phone, making empty threats to an automated banking hotline that nobody was ever going to answer on a holiday. Porch. "Did you hear what I just said?" Terrence yelled, the rustle of static cutting through as he paced back and forth. "Connor is losing his mind. He just checked his merchant dashboard and every wire transfer for his eco-supply chain got bounced back. His operational account is at zero. He's threatening to sue me, Maya. He's suing my logistics firm for breach of contract. Porch, you need to get into the back end and fix this right now." He still hadn't figured it out. His arrogance was so deeply rooted in his subconscious that his brain simply refused to process reality. He genuinely believed this was a massive technical glitch. He thought the system I built had crashed, so he was commanding his glorified teller wife to restart the servers. Porch. He still thought he was the boss. "And my truck is gone," Terrence continued, his breathing getting more ragged. "I walked outside to get a gift for Zuri out of the trunk, and the driveway was empty. Security at the front gate said a flatbed truck bypassed the entrance and legally repossessed the vehicle." "Legally repossessed? Maya, did you forget to authorize the lease payments?" Porch. "You were handling the administrative overhead. How could you let my primary vehicle default?" He was trying to cover for his unpaid bills, trying to shift the blame onto me. He wanted to paint me as a careless assistant who forgot to file paperwork, completely blind to the reality that I was the head of the holding firm that ordered the repossession in the first place. Porch. I remained completely silent. I set the crystal glass down on the mahogany desk. I leaned back, crossed my legs, and stared at the red alerts flashing across my fourth monitor. The system was tracking every single transaction declined attempt in real time. He was furiously swiping a dead piece of plastic, praying for a miracle. "Porch. Say something," Terrence screamed, finally losing his last grip on composure. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You're punishing me because I asked you to stay home. You're throwing a tantrum because Chloe is here. You're trying to humiliate me in front of my family over petty jealousy." He was projecting. Porch. He was throwing every psychological trick he had ever used against me right at the wall, hoping something would stick. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to defend myself against the charge of jealousy. If I argued, he'd have a target. He'd have an emotional, irrational wife to blame for destroying the night. Porch. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to a child?" Terrence demanded, shifting tactics to weaponize his daughter. "Zuri is sitting in the living room watching her grandmother cry. She's watching her father get humiliated. You are ruining a little girl's holiday just to get back at me. Unfreeze the accounts immediately." Maya, I'm not asking you, I am ordering you. Unlock the trust. Torch. The desperation in his voice was intoxicating. This man, who had so casually excluded me from the holiday gathering, who had used my capital to secretly fund his brother-in-law, who had diverted funds from our joint holdings to inflate the vanity business of the woman who replaced me, was now begging and threatening me in the exact same breath. I could hear Chloe in the background now. Torch. Her voice was shrill and frantic. She was asking why her boutique's payment gateway had just sent her a federal tax suspension alert. She was asking Terrence why her business checking account had been locked. The whole house of cards had completely collapsed, burying every single one of them under the rubble. Torch. Maya, please, Terrence said, his tone dropping from a yell to a pathetic, trembling plea. Reality was finally setting in. The absolute silence on my end was doing its job. It was suffocating him. He was finally connecting the dots. The family trust, the logistics firm, the credit lines, the truck lease, and Chloe's boutique couldn't all suffer a simultaneous system glitch. Torch. This was a targeted, synchronized shutdown. He finally understood that the woman he left behind in the kitchen wasn't a victim. She was the one holding the keys. Please, Terrence whispered into the receiver, his ego completely shattered. Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you didn't wipe everything out. I leaned forward, placing my elbows on the cool leather desk pad. Torch. The period of silence was over. It was time to deliver the final word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to talk over the chaotic symphony of his collapsing world. I leaned in close to the microphone and took a slow, steady breath. The blue glow of the 4 monitors illuminated my face, casting long, sharp shadows across the penthouse walls. Torch. When I finally spoke, I perfectly matched the casual tone he had used 12 hours earlier in that spotless kitchen when he told me, "You're not welcome with my family." I just wanted to make sure your ex-wife got the full experience, Terrence, I said smoothly. A man with no money, running a failing company, living in a house under foreclosure. Torch. That's the exact deal she signed up for when she decided to play house with my money. Dead silence fell over the line. For a fraction of a second, even Vivian's sobbing and Connor's screaming in the background seemed to evaporate. Terrence was processing the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. He opened his mouth, making a raspy, choking sound, unable to form an actual word. Torch. The invincible executive had been reduced right back to a breathless, out-of-depth amateur. Didn't you want Zuri to spend a complete holiday with her real family? I continued, the coldness in my voice crystallizing over the connection. I completely agree. I think it's wonderful. I think it's extremely important for her to see her father for who he really is. Torch. Not some self-made logistics giant, not a generous benefactor funding his brother-in-law, and definitely not a man who can afford luxury SUVs and diamond bracelets on his own merit. Tonight, she gets to see the real Terrence, a man who had to quietly siphon money from his wife's private equity holdings just to buy a shred of respect. Maya, please, he finally rasped out. Torch. The arrogant undertone in his voice had completely fractured into a high-pitched, desperate whimper. You can't do this. The tax notices. Chloe just got an email from her payment processor. You reported her boutique. She's going to face legal exposure for tax evasion. We co-parent a daughter. You're destroying my child's mother. I wasn't the one evading federal taxes, Terrence. Torch. You and Chloe were, I countered smoothly. I simply provided a highly detailed, 120-page forensic accounting report to the financial authorities to ensure her public claims of being a self-made entrepreneur perfectly matched her official tax filings. Torch. As a licensed financial fiduciary, when I discover corporate misappropriation inside my own holding accounts, I am legally obligated to report it. I took another deliberate sip of bourbon, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Victory tasted incredible. Speaking of legal obligations, you might want to advise your parents to start packing tonight. Torch. The third-party entity that stepped in to settle their debts 3 years ago has officially initiated default proceedings on their mortgage. They have 30 days to clear out of my property. Though anyone who knows Vivian knows she'll probably start packing her heirloom pearl jewelry tonight before the movers even arrive. Your property? The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was hyperventilating now, taking short, sharp gasps of air. You own my parents' house? You own the estate? Maya, no. You're lying, you're bluffing. You couldn't possibly have that kind of leverage. Check the public land registry, I replied simply. At 11:59 p.m. tonight, title was transferred to my Delaware LLC, right along with the repossession order for your Mercedes SUV. Tell me, did the flatbed driver at least let you get Zuri's gifts out of the trunk before he towed your pride down the street? He started crying. Real, deep-throated sobbing. The man who had once dismissed me as just a bank teller was weeping into the receiver. The proud patriarch was being brought down in real time. Maya, I am begging you. Terrence sobbed. I'll make Chloe leave right now. I'll tell her to pack her bags and get out of the house. I'll kick Connor out. I'll have my parents get on their knees and apologize to you. Anything you want me to do, I'll do it. Just unlock the trust. Just give me a bridge loan. I am begging you on my hands and knees. It was pathetic. The moment his funding dried up, he was ready to throw away the people he called his real family, without a second thought. To save himself, he would feed his ex-wife to the wolves and throw his sister's husband out the door. That was the Sterling family's idea of loyalty. It was entirely conditional, completely transactional, and utterly worthless. Terrence, you don't have a leg left to stand on, I said, feeling absolute authority coursing through my veins. The shift was complete. I was no longer the quiet wife in the background. I was the architect of his downfall. Enjoy your holiday. I'll see you at 8 tomorrow morning. We have paperwork to finalize. Wait! What paperwork? Maya, don't hang up. Maya, I need you. Happy holidays, Terrence. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button, cutting off his frantic, pleading screams mid-sentence. The sudden silence was immensely satisfying. I didn't just end the call. I held down the power button and watched the screen go completely dark. The digital tether was dead. I tossed the powered-off phone to the far side of the mahogany desk. It wouldn't be ringing again tonight. Quiet settled back over my penthouse, thick and luxurious. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing Atlanta in a quiet, icy embrace. The storm had arrived. I finished the last drop of bourbon, my mind already moving to the next phase of the plan. The financial execution had been flawless. The digital battle was won. But the final, most satisfying scene had yet to play out. I needed to look them in the eye and make sure they understood exactly who held the deed to their entire lives. I closed my laptop, and the blue glow faded from the room. I was ready for the morning. It was time for the landlord to collect the rent. At 8 o'clock sharp the next morning, a black Lincoln Town car glided smoothly down the quiet streets of Buckhead. Fresh snow covered the manicured lawns of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhood in a crisp, bright frost. My driver navigated the winding neighborhood with practiced precision, slowing down as we approached the massive wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate. I didn't lean out to buzz the intercom. I didn't ask for permission to enter the property. I simply rolled down the tinted window, entered the master override code on the digital keypad, and watched the heavy gates swing wide open to welcome the true owner of the land. We pulled into the wide circular driveway. The space felt eerily empty. The custom matte black luxurious SUV, the centerpiece of Terrence's arrogant social media livestream the night before, was gone, safely locked away in a city impound lot downtown. Its absence stood as a glaring monument to the financial reckoning I had unleashed overnight. I stepped out of the sedan. The biting winter wind hit my face, but all I felt was the warm, radiant sensation of complete control. I wore a tailored camel cashmere coat, spotless leather boots, and carried a structured designer handbag, packed with legal documents capable of dismantling whatever was left of their pride. I walked up the wide stone steps leading to the heavy oak double doors. Porch. For years I had stood on this exact porch, waiting for Vivian to open the door, waiting for her to offer a tight, condescending smile before criticizing my outfit or my career. I had always been treated as an unwanted guest, barely allowed on the invite list. Today, I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I reached into my bag and pulled out a heavy brass key. Porch. I inserted the master key into the deadbolt. The lock turned with a loud, satisfying metallic click. I pushed open the grand oak doors and stepped into the sprawling foyer, paved with imported marble. The cold air from outside rushed into the overheated, stifling house. What met my eyes was a picture of absolute chaos. Porch. The picture-perfect family holiday Terrence had tried so hard to curate had turned into a total disaster. The illusion of generational wealth had completely shattered, leaving behind a group of frantic, terrified people. At first, no one even noticed me walk in because the shouting in the hallway was deafening. Porch. Terrence was pacing back and forth on the Persian rug, looking like a man who had barely survived a physical ordeal. He was still wearing the tailored velvet dinner jacket from his video the night before, but it was ruined. It was rumpled, unbuttoned, and his expensive silk tie had been yanked off and tossed onto the floor. Porch. His eyes were bloodshot and sunken with dark circles after a completely sleepless night. He was gripping his useless phone, talking to himself as he paced, every shred of his executive bravado stripped away. On the other side of the foyer, Chloe was curled up on the custom white designer sofa. The glamorous high society wife persona was completely gone. Porch. She was crying hysterically, her makeup smeared down her face in dark streaks. She was clutching a tablet, staring at the bright red notifications, freezing her boutique's merchant accounts. She was crying out loud about vendor default notices and her landlord threatening to lock the doors. Her whole identity as a self-made business owner was collapsing around her. Porch. But the loudest noise in the room was coming from the archway leading to the dining room. Connor was in a vicious shouting match with his wife, Jada. The environmentally conscious ally had completely dropped his calm facade. His face was beet red with unfiltered anger and panic. "You told me he had capital!" Connor yelled at Jada, waving his hands aggressively. Porch. "You told me your brother could easily handle that bridge loan. My European suppliers have locked me out of the system. The owner of the Aspen Chalice just canceled our reservation because the card was declined. I'm facing corporate default by Tuesday morning, and your brother is walking around in circles, telling me his bank accounts vanished into thin air." Porch. Jada shouted right back, equally humiliated and terrified. "Don't you dare yell at me in my parents' house, Connor. We are all dealing with a banking error. Terrence is going to fix it. You just need to calm down and wait for the banks to open. This isn't a banking error." Connor roared back, his voice cracking with panic. Porch. "A banking error doesn't send a tow truck to the driveway in the middle of the night to repossess a vehicle. A banking error doesn't freeze corporate supply chains. We're done, Jada. We are completely ruined." In the corner of the room, Vivian was slumped in an ornate armchair. The matriarch of the Sterling family looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Porch. Her emerald silk dress was wrinkled, and her posture was completely broken. DeAndre stood near the hallway, pouring himself a glass of dark liquor at 8 in the morning, staring blankly at the wall. The reality of his long-hidden financial failures had finally caught up to him, leaving him paralyzed. I stood quietly in the entrance, taking in the grand mess I had created. I let them shout. Porch. I let them panic. I let them grieve the money they had been siphoning away. Then I reached back and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. The door closed with a booming slam that echoed off the high ceilings of the foyer. The shouting stopped instantly. Connor froze mid-sentence. Chloe gasped and sat up straight on the sofa. Vivian flinched in her armchair. Porch. Every single eye in the room snapped directly toward the entrance. I stood perfectly composed on the marble floor. I met Terrence's bloodshot eyes. He stared at my calm demeanor, my spotless clothes, and the cold indifference on my face. A heavy silence spread through the room as the reality of who actually held the power finally settled over the entire family. Vivian was the first to recover. Her survival instincts were rooted in decades of dominating country club luncheons and shutting down dissent with a single sharp look. She straightened her back, smoothed the front of her wrinkled silk gown, and walked across the foyer toward me in her heels. The clicking of her shoes against the hard stone floor echoed her racing heartbeat. She stopped exactly 3 feet away from me, raising her chin to look down her nose at me, even though my boots put us at eye level. "How dare you step foot into my home?" Vivian spat through clenched teeth, her voice trembling with indignation as she tried to maintain her regal composure. "After the stunt you pulled last night, locking down our accounts with your banking tricks, you have the nerve to show up here. Get out. We are dealing with a serious family crisis, and you are no longer a part of this family. Terrence is handling the bank, and Chloe is here supporting him. You are trespassing." I didn't blink. I didn't shift my stance. I looked at this woman who had spent years treating me like an uninvited guest at dinners I secretly funded. I looked past her at DeAndre, who was holding onto his drink like a lifeline, and then at Terrence, who looked remarkably pale and small. "Your home," I repeated, savoring the pure delusion in those words. "What a charming concept, Vivian." She crossed her arms, her knuckles white. "Don't play word games with me, Maya. I know you're upset, because Terrence wanted his daughter to have a proper holiday with her real mother. But throwing a digital tantrum online doesn't change the fact that this is the Sterling estate. We have lived here for 25 years. You were just a guest who overstayed her welcome. Leave right now, or I'll have Connor call the police." I unclasped the gold fastener on my structured handbag. The smooth, mechanical sound drew everyone's eyes. I reached in and pulled out a thick, flat manila folder. I held it in my right hand, feeling the satisfying weight of their entire family legacy bound in legal parchment. I took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, forcing Vivian to step back to maintain her space. I walked straight up to her pristine marble entrance table, the one holding a ridiculously large vase of imported winter lilies. I tossed the folder onto the marble tabletop. The heavy thud of paper hitting stone made Chloe jump on the sofa across the room. "What is this?" Vivian demanded, looking at the folder like it was a poisonous snake, refusing to touch it. "This is reality," I said, my voice cutting through the cold air of the foyer like a scalpel. "I suggest you open it." Vivian scoffed and lifted her chin higher. However, DeAndre recognized the seal printed on the corner of the envelope, the mark of a prominent commercial real estate law firm in Atlanta. He set his crystal glass down and walked over, his steps heavy and hesitant. He picked up the folder, opened the flap, and pulled out the stack of documents. I watched his eyes scan the first page. It was the original promissory note from 3 years ago. The debt restructuring agreement he had signed to avoid personal bankruptcy. His eyes darted to the second page. The transfer of the deed of trust. His breathing turned shallow and fast. He turned to the third page, an official notice of default, and finally, the last page, a 30-day notice to vacate. "DeAndre, what is that?" Vivian demanded, losing patience with his dead silence. "Tell her to leave so Terrence can fix the accounts. We have guests coming for brunch in 3 hours." DeAndre didn't look at his wife. He looked straight at me. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving behind an unhealthy gray pale. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, making the heavy legal pages rustle in the quiet room. "The holding company," DeAndre whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. "The private investment firm that bought our commercial debt. It's you." "It was always me," I replied smoothly, making sure my voice carried across the silent fofoy so Terrence and Chloe heard every single word. DeAndre, you were drowning in bad commercial real estate bets. Creditors were days away from seizing everything you owned. Arch. Terrence came to me in the middle of the night, terrified that his precious family name would be dragged through the mud and his inheritance wiped out. I used my private equity firm to purchase your defaulted debt. I paid off the aggressive creditors. I took over the note. I became the bank. Vivian snatched the documents from her husband's her fingers trembling. Porch. Her eyes scanned the legal terms frantically, desperate to find a loophole, a mistake, anything to call me a liar. She saw my legal name listed as the sole owner of the holding company that owned the deed. She saw the bright red stamp indicating immediate foreclosure, initiated due to non-payment. No! Vivian gasped, the papers slipping from her fingers and scattering across the marble floor. Porch. No, this is impossible. This is our legacy. This house has been in the Sterling family for decades. You can't just take it. You were a bank teller. You don't have this kind of capital. I didn't take anything, I corrected her, keeping my cold composure as her world burned down around her. I bought it. I own it. Porch. For the last 3 years, I allowed you to live here because I briefly believed I was part of the family you were so desperate to protect. But since you made it crystal clear last night that I don't belong, I decided it was time to legally clarify the title. He took a step toward me, his face twisted in pure desperation. Maya, you can't do this to my parents. Porch. They're older. You can't put them out on the street. I'll get the money. I'll pay off the balance. Just give me time to liquidate the logistics assets and I'll make you whole. I turned my gaze to Terrence, a sharp, cold smile touching my face. You can't liquidate what you don't own, Terrence. Your logistics firm has been operating in the red for 2 years. Porch. The only reason your doors stayed open was because I was injecting capital into your operational accounts through anonymous holdings. And those accounts were completely frozen at midnight. You have absolutely nothing left to sell. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sob from the sofa. Porch. She finally realized that the man she had clung to for financial security was completely broke, and the grand estate she hoped to secure for her daughter had been officially repossessed. I looked back at Vivian. The proud, untouchable matriarch was trembling, staring at the eviction notices scattered at her feet. Porch. The realization that she was entirely dependent on the woman she had routinely looked down on completely broke her. She looked up at me, opening her mouth to speak. Maybe to beg, maybe to throw another insult to protect her broken pride. But I didn't give her the chance. You have 30 days to vacate my property, Vivian. Make sure you don't scratch my floors on the way out. Porch. The heavy silence in the grand foyer was suddenly broken by the sound of someone clearing their throat. Connor stepped out from the dining room archway. He carefully walked around the eviction documents scattered on the floor and placed himself directly between me and Vivian. He raised his hands in a calming gesture, palms out, as if trying to soothe a wild animal. Porch. He smoothed down his linen shirt, adjusted his posture, and slid effortlessly into his favorite role. He was going to play the progressive, reasonable mediator. Maya, let's all just take a deep breath, Connor said. His voice was soft, dripping with the artificial empathy he used when talking down to people. I know you're hurt. I know Terrence made a huge mistake by not including you today. Porch. But you're taking a personal grievance and turning it into an absurd revenge scheme. You're acting completely irrational right now. I didn't even blink. I just stood there watching his performance. Look at the energy you're bringing into this house, Connor continued, emboldened by my silence. This hostility is toxic, Maya. You're acting far too aggressive. Porch. You're weaponizing your financial position to punish an entire family over a simple miscommunication. We are all dealing with the stress of these frozen accounts, and you walking in here with eviction notices is just plain malicious. It's unhealthy, and frankly, this isn't who you really are. Porch. There he was. A man whose lifestyle was funded entirely by my work, standing in the middle of a house I legally owned, trying to police me. He was wearing a designer watch purchased with my private equity earnings, while lecturing me about my behavior. He thought his therapeutic buzzwords and calm demeanor would make me feel ashamed and back down. He thought labeling me hostile and aggressive would force me to retreat just to prove him wrong. I didn't argue with him. I didn't defend my character. I simply reached back into my structured designer handbag. "You're right about one thing, Connor," I said, my voice completely smooth, stripped of any anger he was so desperately trying to provoke. Real wealth is a privilege, but is certainly not a charity. I pulled out a thick, spiral-bound ledger wrapped in a navy blue presentation cover. I held it out toward him. Connor frowned, his calm mediator mask slipping for a fraction of a second. He reached out slowly and took the heavy document from my hand. He opened the plastic cover. "What is this?" he asked, staring at the dense columns of financial data, routing numbers, and transaction timestamps. "That is an itemized breakdown of your entire lifestyle over the last 4 years," I replied, making sure my voice carried across the silent room, so Jada heard every word. "I've been auditing the logistics company's accounts for months. You and Terrence thought you were clever setting up automated transfers, disguised as supply chain consulting fees. You thought hiding your personal expenses under the guise of an eco-packaging startup would keep them safe from scrutiny." Connor froze completely. His eyes darted across the first page of the ledger. The color drained from his face, starting at his neck and spreading upward until he looked ghost white. I narrated the contents of the ledger for everyone else in the room. Page 4 details the $12,000 monthly wire transfers. Terrence authorized just to keep your failing business afloat. Page 9 shows the fraudulent invoices you submitted last week for European suppliers. You coded it as a critical supply chain expense, but the money actually paid for your luxury ski chalet in Aspen and cleared the balance on your platinum card. And my personal favorite is on page 12, the $8,000 charge at a Buckhead jeweler for the diamond tennis bracelet you gave my sister-in-law. Jada let out a sharp, choked gasp in the background. She took a step toward her husband, looking at him in utter horror. "Connor," she whispered, her voice shaking, "what is she talking about? Tell me, she's lying." Connor couldn't speak. He was physically unable to form a single word. His hands shook so violently that the heavy ledger rustled loudly in the quiet room. "He can't tell you I'm lying, Jada, because the bank statements are printed right there in full color," I said calmly. I reached into my bag one last time. I pulled out a thin, crisp legal document folded in half. I stepped closer to Connor. I didn't hand it to him. I held it up so he could read the bold, capitalized text at the top of the page. "Do you know what corporate embezzlement is, Connor?" I asked, dropping my voice to a quiet, precise tone. "When you take funds from a private business, it's a civil matter. But Terrence's logistics firm was originally funded by my private equity firm. That means you weren't just stealing from your brother-in-law. You defrauded a licensed, federally regulated financial institution. You used wire transfers across state lines. That turns your little holiday loan from a family dispute into federal wire fraud." Connor swallowed hard, a drop of cold sweat running down his temple. The confident, progressive man who had just called me aggressive was completely gone. He was staring at a draft of a civil lawsuit for corporate fraud, with his name listed as the primary defendant. "This draft will be filed with the federal court first thing Monday morning," I continued, tapping my manicured nail against the crisp paper. "I am piercing your corporate veil. I am seizing the assets of your eco-friendly startup. Though we both know those assets are practically worthless. More importantly, I am handing this entire ledger over to federal authorities." "Connor, you aren't just facing bankruptcy. You're facing a federal indictment." "Please," Connor rasped, the word barely managing to squeeze out of his throat. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with raw terror, his arrogant dignity completely stripped away. Maya, please. I didn't know the money was yours. Terrence told me it was his profit. I just needed a bridge loan to cover payroll. George, I'll pay it back. I'll sign whatever you want. Please don't hand this over to the authorities. I'll end up in a cell. I stared down at him with an absolute terrifying coldness. You should have considered your freedom before you decided to call my personal phone and order me to approve the money you stole, I said. You wanted me to do my job, Connor. This is my job. I protect my capital. George. Jada let out a furious, heartbreaking scream. She lunged forward, snatching the heavy ledger straight out of Connor's trembling hands. She began flipping through it frantically, her eyes scanning the itemized breakdown of his parasitic behavior. The fake business trips, the stolen money used to buy her affection. George. The absolute humiliation finally hit her. Her entire marriage had been subsidized by the very woman her family had just cast aside. You stole her money? Jada screamed, shoving Connor hard in the chest. You stood in my mother's kitchen and mocked Maya for not being here today. And you're wearing a watch bought with her money? You're a fraud, a complete and pathetic fraud. George. Connor stumbled backward, raising his hands to shield himself from his wife's sudden assault. Jada, wait! Let me explain, he begged, completely ignoring me now, desperately trying to salvage his collapsing marriage. I stepped back smoothly, removing myself from their line of fire. I watched this supposed ally fall apart completely. His bravado evaporated. His unearned wealth vanished. George. His freedom was hanging by a thread. I had completely cut off his lifeline without ever raising my voice. I turned my attention away from the arguing couple, scanning the foyer. It was time to handle the last parasite in the room. In the wreckage of shattered egos and ruined legacies, there was still one person who thought she held a playable card. Chloe had stopped crying on the designer sofa. George. She had watched me systematically dismantle the matriarch and the progressive brother-in-law, with cold, irrefutable paperwork. Her survival instincts kicked in. She stood up, smoothed down the front of her expensive silk loungewear, and tried to summon the arrogant, privileged energy she had proudly displayed on her social media livestream just hours earlier. George. She walked straight up to Terrence, placing herself between me and the man she believed was her ultimate protector. She lifted her chin, adopting a manipulative tone. You're a monster, Maya, Chloe said, her voice shaking with venom. Standing here on a holiday morning, terrifying a family. You think having money makes you powerful, but you're just bitter. George. Terrence only moved those funds because he's a provider. He invested in my boutique to build a legacy for his daughter, to make sure she was taken care of. But because your head is so full of spreadsheets and private equity deals, you have no idea what a real family actually needs. She thought she had found the perfect angle. George. She was weaponizing a child, trying to paint me as a cold, career-driven woman attacking a devoted father and a loving mother. She expected me to feel a shred of guilt. She hoped I would look at the collateral damage and back down out of some misplaced solidarity. I locked eyes with her. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. George. I felt only the absolute clarity of a woman who knew exactly how to balance a ledger. You didn't build a legacy for your daughter, Chloe, I replied, my voice cutting cleanly through the heavy air. You built a federal crime scene. I reached into my structured designer handbag one last time. I pulled out a thick, tightly bound document. George. It didn't bear the stamp of a local real estate attorney or the letterhead of a civil litigator. It carried the unmistakable, stark formatting of a federal government filing. I walked over to the glass coffee table in front of the sofa and dropped the heavy document onto the surface. I suggest you read the executive summary, I instructed. My eyes locked onto her pale face. George. You love telling your thousands of followers online that you're a self-made entrepreneur. You love thanking Terrence for being an amazing sponsor. But real sponsors use their own capital. Terrence used mine. And more importantly, you accepted those funds without declaring a single cent of it as business income. Chloe stared at the folder, her hands shaking at her sides. She refused to pick it up, as if touching the paper would make the nightmare real. Over the past 18 months, Terrence drafted fraudulent corporate invoices to siphon over $250,000 out of my holding accounts directly into your boutique's checking account, I explained, ensuring every syllable landed with destructive precision. He classified those transfers as supply chain consulting fees. You accepted those wires, using them to pay your commercial rent, fund your lavish inventory launch parties, and maintain your fake lifestyle. You didn't report those transfers as taxable income. You didn't pay gift taxes. You illegally commingled stolen corporate funds with your personal vanity project. I watched the rolling estates of Buckhead blur past the tinted window. My private jet was already fueled on the tarmac, ready for a direct flight to the Caribbean. I would be spending the rest of the holiday at my private villa in St. Bart's, surrounded by nothing but turquoise waters and absolute tranquility. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the console's mini-fridge. I looked at my reflection in the dark tint of the car window. I was no longer the quiet partner. I was no longer a convenient asset to be used and discarded by insecure people. I was exactly who I had built myself to be, unbothered, unmatched, and completely untouchable. The deepest lesson of this journey is that true security never comes from shrinking yourself to fit into spaces where you aren't valued. For years, she quietly funded her husband and his family, hoping loyalty would eventually earn their respect. Instead, she realized that toxic people will happily consume your resources while completely disregarding your worth. Ultimate power lies in financial independence, unbreakable boundaries, and the courage to stop subsidizing disrespect. When you finally stop seeking validation from people determined to misunderstand you, you reclaim the narrative. From that moment on, you become unbothered, unmatched, and completely untouchable. If you've ever had to set ruthless boundaries to protect your peace and reclaim your power, share your story of triumph in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering content.